Picking up almost exactly where we left off. Still working on braces. One of my pet theories regarding the carving of braces is to think of the soundboard sort of like a speaker cone. It needs to be flexible around the edges for a couple of reasons. The sides of the instrument make things pretty stiff, and thinning things around the perimeter allows a larger portion of the board to vibrate at frequencies that will produce sound within our range of hearing. I think of the whole assembly as a unit rather than breaking it up into distinct zones. So when I tap on it, I want to hear a wide variety of frequencies. I don't subscribe to tuning it specifically to one note, or tuning each brace to a note, for instance, especially when the soundboard is loose, because everything changes as soon as you glue it up. The guitar is a very complex system. C.F. Martin came up with a bracing pattern that works. There are others that work as well. I will lightly scallop the braces to allow a bit more flexibility, because that's part of the design that's been handed down to us. But it's really debatable just what the scallops do. There are plenty of builders who make simple tapered braces, and that also works just fine. There are some modern bracing designs that go in completely different directions, too. Falcate bracing, some of the reverse V-shapes that Taylor's been using lately. It's kind of amazing what you can do and still have the thing sound like a guitar. When coming up with the design for this instrument, I had to do some string tension calculations, because this has 4 strings rather than 6, but they are thicker and the scale length is longer, and the strings themselves have more mass. So as it turns out, the total string tension is pretty similar to a standard Dreadnought 6-string. So I'm not making things especially stiff. I suppose you could probably put a 6-string neck on this at a standard scale length and it would function just fine. Ebony fretboard. It's a dirty material. I mean, everything just gets filthy after you've worked with it because the dust just clings to everything and it's very evident. So you don't want to rub it onto the soundboard, for instance, where it would get into the pores and just turn gray. Here I'm sanding the headstock to the appropriate thickness. An oscillating spindle sander like this is a really handy machine if you're doing guitar repair or building. It's probably the second machine I would buy after a bandsaw. I decided to get just a little bit fancy and make a book-matched headplate veneer that incorporates the light sapwood of ebony. I've had this offcut sitting around for years, waiting for a moment like this. Its time has arrived. We'll get that glued up. Here I'm marking out the scale length with a fine technical pen on a piece of tape on the back side of the fretboard. I'll also mark the end of the neck. I'm going to give it about a 1-degree angle, which will reduce the amount of sanding I'll have to do later on to achieve the right set of the neck. I'll chop that off with a miter saw set to the appropriate angle. Here I'm sawing the fret slots on a little carrier jig I have for my table saw. Before I glue on the fretboard, I want to cut a relief slot down the center of the heel to accept the threaded inserts I'll be using. With the head veneer in position, I'll drill holes for some little positioning dowels that will keep it from sliding around during the glue-up. I like to use a filler strip over the truss rod rather than having it bear directly against the underside of the fretboard, which some people do. And I mean, I guess there's nothing wrong with that, but in the past I've experienced trying to remove fretboards with the truss rod that's sort of above the level of the neck, and it gets kind of annoying and quite messy. So this is the way I do it. The fret slots having been cut, I can now plane the appropriate taper into the fretboard. It's past the time when I should get some fresh surgical tubing. I wear safety glasses when I wrap it up. I'll clean up the back and thin it out a bit towards the perimeter, just like the soundboard. Again, using the card scraper is probably the way to go for this, because planing this figured maple, although it can be done, is tricky. The scraper is less likely to do serious damage. All of that end grain that's sort of poking up at you tends to want to tear out if you're not careful. And yes, this generates quite a lot of heat. You end up with burnt thumbs, Marco Pierre White says that's fine. It is traditional to glue on a cross-grain support strip over the joint between the halves of the back. Long ago I glued up a length of spruce to cut these from. You can see how oxidized it's gotten. Some people make these supports really, really thick, like 3/8 of an inch thick or 10 millimeters or something. I prefer a thinner, lighter weight support. Here's the plate gluing jig again. It's good for doing the center seam supports too because of the curved clamping caul that provides pressure all the way along the strip. The glue's had a chance to dry. I'll use this angled sanding block to clean up the sides, give it a bit of a profile. Working with the back braces is very similar to the top ones, obviously. I take these down to just under 5/16 of an inch for the top two braces, and the ones in the lower bout are quite a bit thicker, in keeping with tradition. Back to the neck. I'll use a template following bit, registering off of the already pre-sized fretboard to trim the excess stock off the neck. I'll position the back braces on their marks and use a square. I'll use a scalpel to cut through the center strip and then pare away the waste. Go bars, if you buy them through Lutherie suppliers, tend to be very expensive. I made mine from fiberglass rods available through a company called Goodwin's Composites, not a sponsor. I think they're actually for the aerospace industry. They had very reasonable prices. You can cut them to length with a standard hacksaw. Don't breathe in the dust, obviously. Following through with the dictum that you should always be doing something when something else is gluing, I'm working on the end block and the neck block as well. I'll plane the back braces to shape and make them look presentable, because you'll see them through the sound hole. A big chisel is actually easier for jobs like this than a small one. It sort of helps keep your balance. You're less likely to slip off the brace at an angle. I'll plane a little taper into the heel. I'm going to glue up some binding. I'm using offcuts from the sides and a strip of black veneer for a purfling line. And I simply wrap the parts together tightly with dental floss as the clamping agent. These started off about 3 millimeters thick, about 1/8 of an inch, and I want them at about 2 millimeters, so I'll plane the bulk of that off before using my scraper to size it to accurate dimensions. It's easier to bend these when they're all bundled together like this. It's just important to remember that there are left and rights, and you have to have 2 of each, otherwise your guitar is going to look really strange. In a similar way, I glued a piece of veneer to this cutoff from the back. I'll use that for the heel cap. Before gluing the cap on, I'll reinforce the heel with a hardwood dowel running vertically, glued in place. This will give me a guide for carving the heel shape. So we're about halfway through the build already. I said I'd expand a little on the question of why. Why a cello guitar? To refute George Mallory, because it is not there. The obvious thing for me to do would be to make a standard 6-string acoustic guitar and then sell it for a heroic sum, because the market knows what it's getting. I work with standard 6-string acoustics every single day. I know something about them. This is something I've never worked with. I suspect a few people might have tried something like this over the years, but it's not common. You will find mandocellos, double-strung, so 8 strings, long-scale mandolins. You can find fretless 4-string short-scale basses that could be restrung and tuned up. You can buy a 6-string baritone guitar and tune it in fifths and figure out what to do with those extra strings. None of those are quite what I have in mind here, because this is going to be a fretted steel string acoustic long scale, 4-stringed instrument. It's going to have a string spacing on it that is more guitar-like than a bass, and the ergonomics are going to be different. This has actually been rolling around in my head for years. I'm fond of Johann Sebastian Bach. I've listened to classical guitar transcriptions of his solo cello suites for years. They're kind of a backbone of classical guitar repertoire. On the standard guitar, they're always transposed into higher tunings to make them work. Another thing that kind of cemented the idea was listening to my friend Sean Trotter, he recorded the opening music that plays at the start of all of these videos. I heard him play the first cello suite prelude on mandolin a couple of times, and it was really quite captivating. It fits nicely. Chris Thiele has been touring the same thing, the Bach with his mandolin, recently in the past year. In the back of my head, I've got this question. What does a guitar tuned in fifths, starting down in C, actually do if you don't compromise on anything? You don't make it a short scale. You don't make it 6 strings. You make it as pure a cello type experience as you can, but it's a guitar. I've chosen 690 millimeters for the scale length, which is a cello scale. That's about 27 5/16, which is long for standard guitar. It would not be very comfortable to play in first position. Terrible stretches. But then with this tuning, you're not doing cowboy chords. Cellists are quite agile on that scale, and the music that's composed for them takes it into account as well. So that's where we're going with this. I'm making something that's completely new to me. Now, I might put a video out next week, being Christmas week. We'll see. I might just not work for 3 or 4 days and try that, see what that's like. Anyway, take it easy. Happy holidays.